A basketball hero around here is treated like a god. I mean, how can you ever find out what he could really do? I don't want this to be the high point of his life. I've seen them, the real sad ones. They sit around the rest of their lives talking about the glory days when they were 17 years old.
You know, most people would kill to be treated like a god just for a few moments.
Welcome to Keeping the Nostalgia Alive, the Indiana Basketball Memory Show. I am your host, Billy Powell. Thank you for joining us this evening. The book is called The Perfect Season, a memoir of the 1964 to 1965 Evansville College Purple Aces. The author is Dr. Russ Grieger, who is a native of Evansville, Indiana, and was a starting guard on that undefeated 1964-1965 Evansville team, the Purple Aces. And he has just recently inducted into the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame. And he is here to talk about his book, which I was so kind to receive a copy of this book from Indiana University Press. And you can also get his book at iupress.indiana.edu. Russ, thank you so much for spending some time with us to talk about the book and help keep the nostalgia alive and talk about basketball from the great state of Indiana.
Billy, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, I in chatting with you about a week ago in setting up this interview, I talked to you about, you know, the depth that this book has on describing the atmosphere and almost describing your thought process through almost every game of that undefeated 1964-65 season. It is amazing, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. What gave you the idea of, I want to put a book together about that 64-65 season?
Well, that's a good question. It all came together about 4 years ago. It just so happened that two people decided to write books about Evansville College basketball. There was a man from, I think it's Nevada, who's a professional writer who does nothing but sports books. His name is Kyle Keiderling. He was writing a book on the whole history of Evansville basketball, and then another gentleman who was a graduate of Evansville, he wanted to write a book on the season that I played, and both of them contacted me and started, asking questions, and that jogged a lot of memories. And the more we talked about it, and the more the memories came back to me, I just said, I want to write my own book. Both of their books were more from the outside looking in, and I was there in the middle, experienced it, like on the court, figuratively speaking, as opposed to up in the stands. And I just said to myself, I wanted to tell the story from my point of view, and not so much box score types of things, and this happened and that happened, but, what it felt like and what it was that made the personalities that were on the team come together into such a cohesive unit. And then one more thing kind of came together. It just so happened by accident, just on a lark, I took a course at the University of Virginia on creative writing. And so, it just all came together. And I just fell in love with the process and fell in love with creative writing. And out came the book, which finally got published.
I mean, was it something back in the day? Is this fresh, like from your memories, or did you keep a diary?
No, I didn't keep a diary, but my mother and father were really wonderful in a lot of ways. But one of the ways they were wonderful was that they kept a scrapbook, a detailed scrapbook. I mean, and so I've treasured that throughout the years, and and I've kept memorabilia from the season, and of course I'm still in contact occasionally with all my teammates from that year. So I just searched my memory bank and got stimulated by the newspaper reports and the magazine articles and all that kind of stuff, and I was surprised how much I remembered once I got into it.
You know, it's interesting because we chatted about, I know a lot of people who have played in Roberts Stadium, and I've never been to Roberts Stadium. I mean, my memories are from Hinkle Fieldhouse with my high school and a lot of basketball games that I went to. But, you go so in-depth and you describe it so well that I almost feel like I know Roberts Stadium better than I know Hinkle Fieldhouse.
Well, that's quite a compliment, actually, Billy, because one of the things I learned in doing creative writing was that you have to put the reader in the scene. I've written a lot of things professionally over the years, like pedantic, scholarly sorts of things. And in a scholarly writing, you just kind of tell it. You kind of lecture on the page, if you will. But there's a creative writing mantra that they tell you over and over again. They say, show, don't tell. In other words, instead of saying, I was nervous before the game, that's telling. You have to sort of show what nervousness looks like. The sweat on your upper lip, your leg tapping the floor, So the whole creative writing thing, which I struggled with, I have to admit, I've gotten better at it as time went on, but it's all about trying to put the reader right there in the scenes. So it's almost like trying to write a movie that a person sits in the theater and watches, as opposed to telling them about what happened. Telling is kind of journalism. Showing is kind of, I guess, creative writing.
Tell us a little bit. Who entered? What is your first memories of the game of basketball, and was that your first favorite sport, or was it another sport?
Well, my first memory was in the backyards of the neighborhood I lived in when I was a little bitty kid, which I actually tell in the book, where I was walking. I must have been 4 or 5 or 6 years old, and I walked down into some neighbor's backyard, and there was a wooden bang board and a rim without a net, and dirt ground and a rubber basketball. And I remember picking it up and trying to throw it up through the hoop with no success, and then thinking, of course, that this is really stupid to try to do this, and went home. And but then I grew up, and I became a grade school kid, and was able to get the ball up to the basket. But my biggest first memory, I guess, is when I was in grade school. We would go down to the Central Gym in Evansville and see the Central Golden Bears play basketball. They were ranked in the top 5 in the state 2 or 3 years running. They had this wonderful player named Jerry Clayton, who's a legend in Evansville. He went to Evansville College but didn't finish. It's unfortunate because he was really like an All-American type caliber. But we followed the Central Bears for the whole season with season tickets, and I fell in love with the game of basketball. And, of course, Jerry Clayton was one of my heroes. And, I try to model my jump shot after Jerry Clayton. And, you being an Indiana boy know what I'm talking about. It's hard for a boy not to fall in love with basketball when you grow up in Indiana.
When you were a kid, did you even, was a thought even there that you would eventually go to Evansville?
No, I didn't. All through high school, I didn't even really think about it. I just, I always thought that I would play basketball, and I always knew that I'd play college basketball. I hoped that I would play pro ball, but of course that didn't work out. I was not quite good enough to play pro ball. But when I got to the time of going to college, my ambition was to leave Evansville, which I did. I made a mistake. Went to St. Louis University for 2 years, which played a style that was unsuited to my game. And I asked Coach McCutcheon if he would welcome me back to Evansville, and he did. And he said to me, "Well, I'm glad you finally recognized the errors of your way a couple of years ago." So I just was lucky as lucky can be to have transferred back to Evansville and be a senior on the team the same year that Jerry Sloan was a senior, and Larry Humes from Indianapolis, actually originally from Madison, he was there, and my teammate Sam Watkins from Louisville and Herb Williams from Centralia, Illinois, we all kind of coalesced together at the same time, and there you have it.
In the book, there's one part in the book where you kind of describe how you kind of had to. You were in most cases, in most teams that you played on, you were the scorer. You were the one that, if your team was going to win the game, it was going to be because of the points that you put up. But you kind of stepped back, knowing the talent that you had around you. How hard was that?
Well, it wasn't hard at all, actually, because even though I was, the man, so to speak, in high school, I realized by that point that I wasn't the man. And, I know this is going to sound like I'm a goody two-shoes, but by that point, I really felt blessed to be on the team and blessed to be playing so much, being a starter. And, it was actually a pleasure to be a part of the team, and, we had 2 All-Americans on our first team, and it's hard to be resentful, that you don't shoot the ball as much as you might like when you have 2 first-team All-Americans on our starting 5. So one of the strengths we had as a team where everybody played a role and everybody appreciated everybody. And, Jerry Sloan, for example, was, by this year, he was already a 2-time first-team All-American. And, he could have scored 25 or so points a game, but Larry Humes was a scoring machine, one of the best offensive players I've ever seen in my life. And, Jerry just he's the one that was noble. He's the one that stepped back, and he ended up averaging like 17 a game, but Larry Humes averaged like 33. And there was just no question, but that was the way it was. And Jerry was still the man. He was our leader and, our hero in some ways, but who scored what didn't really make any difference. We just kept kicking butt the whole season.
Tell us a little bit about your experience at St. Louis, because I think when you went over there, they kind of like rolled the red carpet out for you, right? You met a lot of people that you probably wouldn't have met if you wouldn't have gone to St. Louis.
My recruiting to St. Louis was like a phenomenal experience. They made it sound like I was going to step right off of the St. Louis University court onto the St. Louis Hawks court. But it wasn't. It didn't turn out that way, unfortunately, or actually, fortunately, in the long run. You never know where things are going to lead, because it did lead to the 64-65 Aces season. But when I was there, after we took in a Billiken game, and afterwards, the coach John Bennington, took my parents and I and my brother out to dinner. And at Musial and Biggie's restaurant, one of the famous St. Louis restaurants, part owned by Stan Musial. And, lo and behold, next thing I know, there's Stan Musial sitting at my table, introducing himself and wishing that I come to St. Louis. He said, and we make the World Series next year. You can be a guest in my box. And I just, at that moment, I wanted to sign on the dotted line. Next thing I know, Bob Pettit walked up. He was the big star of the St. Louis Hawks at the time, 6'11". His nickname was Big Blue. Why, I don't know. But he says the same thing to me, and he was my basketball idol at that point, Bob Pettit. Of course, everybody idolized Stan Musial, so I was like, I didn't have a chance. I was seduced. I was ready to sign on the dotted line at that point.
If you had to compare Coach McCutcheon to a modern-day coach now or a coach in the past 20 years, who would you compare him to? And can you give us a little bit of an idea of what kind of human being he was?
He was a man of wonderful character. He was a gentleman. He was cerebral. He didn't exude hugs and kisses. He's not the kind of guy that you'd walk up to and throw a bear hug on. He was a handshake kind of a guy, very cerebral, very bright. He was an analyst of the game. And I just respected his mind and I respected his temperament. But what I really came to respect and love was his character. He was a true gentleman. He was never unkind to anybody. He went out of his way to praise his players as opposed to criticizing them. His criticism was always instruction. He's one of the great men in my life. We guys always have a few men who we look up to and made an imprint on us. And Coach McCutcheon certainly was one of those to me. If I can just tell one little quick story, when we were in the dressing room ready to come out to play the championship NCAA game, we were 28-0. Everything was on the line, our undefeated season, our number one ranking, our national championship. And he pulls us back in the dressing room, and instead of giving us one of those rah, 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 put your blood on the court, don't shame your mother and father, your manhood's at stake, none of that stuff. He basically just said, boys, I'm very proud of you. Go out and do your very best. Whether we win or lose, we're going to have breakfast together tomorrow morning. And that's all he said. And, as I say in the book, that's exactly when I fell in love with the man, because, that just told to me tons and tons and tons about his character. Let's keep this in perspective, and let's hold our heads high no matter what happens. This is not do or die. It's just a game, really. So I don't know if I've explained to you, Billy, what he said, what he was, but he was a great man, no question in my mind about it.
In that same regard, what can you tell us your thoughts and what kind of teammates were both Jerry Sloan and Larry Humes?
Larry, first of all, was a very quiet, shy sort of a guy. And, the word that I use think about when I think of Larry is sweet. To this day, he's a very sweet soul. But he had a lot of pride, and, he had a lot of self-confidence, and he wanted the ball. He wanted the ball in all circumstances, You probably never saw us play, Billy. You're probably much younger than I am. But he, I remember many times he would just get the ball off to the side, and he would launch one of those silky smooth hook shots, so far out you would never think anybody would conceptualize doing a hook shot. And so he never lacked confidence that he could put the ball through the basket. Jerry Sloan was a warrior. I mean, he exuded passion. He once said to me, when I was sitting in Roberts a few years ago next to Jerry watching one of the Aces games, and I said something about, Jerry, how many games have you sat through in your career? Doesn't this ever get old to you, sitting here analyzing this and analyzing that? He said, I never coached or I never played with my mind. I always did it with my heart. And that was pretty self-perceptive, I thought, because that was Jerry. He was a warrior, and he never let up. He never let down. If you went up against Jerry in practice, you always went in the locker room after practice with bruises on you. And not that he was mean and dirty, he wasn't, but he just played the game to win. And I don't know a lot of people who know Jerry in his professional career, but I'll bet you there's virtually nobody who doesn't respect Jerry. He's just the sort of guy that it's natural to respect. So those are pretty two solid guys who were our two All-Americans right there.
From 64 and 65, are all the team members? Have we lost a few? Have we lost a few of the team members?
We have. We've lost a couple of guys, 2 or 3 of them. It's a sad thing, of course, to lose them. Just lost one of my bossy high school buddies just this year, Larry Denton. He was our first big man off the bench, 6'6", 6'7", left-hander guy. He died a death of cancer, but he was also a sweetheart, a very gentle soul, and I miss Larry tremendously. But a couple of the other guys have passed away a few years back, so we're getting to that age, I guess.
You describe a lot of it in the book, but, tell us a little bit about the Evansville community and the support they gave you Aces. Well,
this one man who wrote this book on the history, the story of Evansville College and the Purple Aces, it's called Trophies and Tears. The reason he wrote the book was because he ran across a statistic that said that a little bitty Evansville College, with an enrollment of about 2,000 people, ranked in the top 5 of attendance throughout the nation. We were equal to or ahead of the University of Kentucky at that point in attendance, and I think Wichita State was perennially in the top 5, whatever. But that fascinated him, and that stimulated him to do some research about Evansville and the Aces. And, the answer to the whole question was that, the Aces became the tri-state and the community's team. It's like, we were kind of the emblem of the passion that they had for sports. We were the source of pride for this little bitty economically challenged town in the southern toe of Indiana, looked down upon by the big boys in the north, the South Bends and the Muncies and the Indianapolises and stuff like that. So I guess for both psychological reasons and sports reasons and excitement reasons, the Aces became like all things to all people, and it became a community. Everywhere we went, we were feted and, idolized, if you will, and revered. And, it just felt no matter where you go, you were with family. And it was just a wonderful thing to be a part of. And I feel myself blessed to be on the receiving end, and I had to remind myself sometimes that, well, I don't know if I reminded myself, but, it was kind of a fascinating thing to be on the court and having all of this hubbub going on around me and not thinking of it as all one big piece, like a gestalt, if you will, between them and us. And, every once in a while I had to remind myself that we were the one doing it. They were just kind of emotionally sharing in it, but we were kind of the author of it, and they were the reader of it in a sense, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like all of one. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but it was a really very fulfilling kind of an experience.
While you were at Bosse, you played maybe in front of 2,500 to 3,500 people, and then you went away for a little while. What was it like to come back and play in front of 13,000 people?
Well, it's quite a jump, and you have to think about it. You watch college ball today, and they're playing before 17,000, 25,000. In the NCAA tournament, what did they get? Like 70,000 sometimes in these big, like the Indianapolis football arena up there. I forget what it's called, Lucas Oil Field. Mm-hmm. But if you stop and think about it, these are just children. Back then I was a year older than most people because I redshirted, but we're talking about 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old children. I watched the Ohio State football game last night against Wisconsin on television, and one of the players, you watch this game and these big brutes are knocking the hell out of each other and doing these magnificent things like catching these unbelievable catches 25 yards down the line. And one of these players took their helmet off, and I said, well, that kid is just out of diapers. It's hard to believe how young they are, and how young we were. So to be doing that thing in front of all those people can be very, very, very daunting. So it's quite an experience, and I guess it was scary a little bit the first couple of times in front of them.
Tell us a little bit about the mystique of the warm-ups. I love that story.
You mean putting the ball up against the bankboard? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Well, Aaron McCutcheon had this little warm-up where we would go out in our preliminary warm-ups, and we do the two lines and shoot layups just to kind of get our muscles, loosened a little bit. Then we'd do shooting and everything like that, and then we would go back in the dressing room for final instructions and pep talks and all that kind of good stuff. And he would have this drill whereby, he'd get us lined up at midcourt, and one person would dribble up to the backboard and put the ball against the backboard, but not into the basket. And the second person would come behind it and jump in the air and bounce the ball back against the backboard, and on and on and on and on and on until we got to the last guy, who was always our center, Herb Williams, who wasn't that tall. He was like 6'3" or 6'4", but he could jump up over the little white box. He could jump out of the building. He never lost the tip the whole year against 6'8", 6'9", 6'10" players. He could jump so high. but he would be the last one in line, and he, instead of bouncing it back against the backboard, he'd catch it in two hands and just slam it down through the basket. And of course, the fans knew that this was coming, so it became a ritual. And that was kind of like, I guess, the final firing up of us and firing up of them before we took the court to play the game. So just one of those little rituals. I think that's what you're referring to.
Yes. Tell us about a couple of the possibilities where the book, The Perfect Season, would not have been made because you guys had the opportunity. You didn't, but you guys may have lost a game. What were some of the toughest games that were in your path to get through that undefeated season?
Well, the first three games we played against Division I teams who were ranked in the top 20. We started out playing Iowa, and then we played Northwestern, and then we played Notre Dame. And they may have been in the top 10, maybe the top 5 when we played them. And we were just new starting 5, meaning we had only played together as a starting 5 in practice. So it took us a little bit of a while to get our bearings and our coordination, with each other. So those were games in which we won each of those games from anywhere from 5 to 10 points. But, they were games that were competitive to the end. But the rest of the season, there were only 3 games in which there was really a concern about winning. And all 3 of those was against Southern Illinois University, where we beat them on a last-second shot by Larry Humes at Roberts Stadium, like our 14th game of the season. And then our very last game of the regular season, we played SIU in Carbondale, and we were up by 1 point, and they took the last shot and missed, thankfully. Herbie Williams pulled down the rebound and threw it to me as the horn sounded. And then we went into overtime to beat Southern Illinois in the NCAA championship game, ended up winning that game by, I think it was 3 points. So we played them 125 minutes throughout the course of the season in 3 games, and only 5 points total separated us. So they were a great basketball team, and we could have lost all 3 of those if the luck could have gone the other way. But we didn't.
And I know you guys, give us a little bit, what's the difference between where you guys were at and Division I at that time, and who won the national championship in Division I, and could you have won the national championship in Division I?
Well, UCLA won the national championship in Division I, and they had, I believe that had Gail Goodrich, who you might remember, and Walt Hazard, and I forget who else. They were their 2 guards. After we won our championship and they won their championship, there was a movement to try to get us to play, and we agreed to play UCLA. Of course, we had nothing to lose. They had everything to lose, and John Wooden decided not to do it. He declined the offer. But, what am I going to say? Of course we could have beaten them. I don't know if we would have. Of course, we'll never know. But, I can't conceive of any team in the country having any 2 players better than Jerry Sloan and Larry Humes. 2 first-team All-Americans, think about it. And the other 3 of us who were on the starting 5, we were not slouches. we were not All-American caliber, but we were certainly competent. And I think we could have beaten them. Would we? Who knows? Now, the only difference between Division I and Division II back then was Division I was defined by how many Division I teams you played, and we played 1 or 2 less Division I teams that would have given us Division I status. So it was simply a matter of the number of Division I teams you played. And of course, we were limited by we were in the Indiana Collegiate Conference at the time, and had to play the likes of Valparaiso and Ball State and so on and so forth. Indiana State, who were all Division II at the time.
In your career at Evansville, what was your favorite place to play besides in Roberts Stadium?
Well, as I talk about in the book, it was quite a thrill and actually a little bit intimidating for me to play at Butler Fieldhouse because I grew up an Indiana boy. And, of course, I never missed the state championship game on television. I remember watching Oscar Robertson win his state championship when he was a senior at Crispus Attucks and scoring like 55 points and completely dominating the game. And, I always thought of Butler Fieldhouse as the cathedral, a cathedral. So I remember vividly walking into Butler Fieldhouse, the shoot-around when we played Butler at Butler Fieldhouse, and just being awestruck by the place. And so that was one of my best memories. But we liked to play on the road a lot, and so it was more of a challenge to play on the road than to play at home. So it was always fun going up in front of the other people's fans.
Did Russ Grieger trash talk?
No, I didn't. I didn't. The trash talking wasn't really part of it back then. I was kind of a cheerleader. I was vocal, but it was more like "Great shot, Larry." Okay, let's hold him. Whatever. It was more of I talked a lot, but it was more positive. And also I didn't have a lot of room to trash talk. I wasn't throwing up 22 points a game or anything.
Well, but also too, what pumped you up or got you, because in the book there are a couple times where you were mismatched and you held your own and for that reason you guys went undefeated.
So what are you asking, Billy? I lost it there.
So what got you pumped up? I mean, there's some, in reading the book, there's some places in the book where you were kind of mismatched, but what got you pumped up before the game, or what drove you during some of those games?
Well, I was pumped up for every game. Part of it was, to pull out a psychological cliche, part of it was performance anxiety. I remember, starting way back in grade school, I would always get nervous before every game. I'd wake up on game day, whether it was playing for Christ the King Elementary School in the Parochial League or Bossy High or Evansville. It was all about, oh my goodness, I'd wake up in the morning and I'd have that knot in my stomach, and I would know that it was because it was game day. And, the idea of going out, kind of naked in a sense. I mean, you don't have a helmet on, and you don't have shoulder pads, and your face is exposed, and, and being in front of 12, 13, 14,000 people and looking like a fool, can play havoc with one's ego. So there was a little bit of the anxiety, and I can't imagine that most players don't experience some of that. Bill Russell used to say that he would throw up before every professional game. I mean, that's like 65 to 82 games a year he would throw up. He was so nervous. But also, it was like the thrill of playing. I mean, it's a world unto its own, and the idea of exercising, the competitive talent, and I don't know how to say it without it sounding stupid, but just the thrill of being able to play the game at such a high level was enough to pump me up. And I guess the last thing I would say, you're asking such good questions, Billy. It's stimulating me to think here. But we were not an emotional team in the sense that we were pumped up in the sense that we were foaming at the mouth. It was like, let's get the job done. McCutcheon said he never had to motivate us, and that's because we had like an intensity and a focus, and it was like kill 'em kind of thing. It was more like, let's win. And so there was kind of an attitude on the team. We're going to go out and kick butt. So I don't know if I'm making any sense or not, but there's a lot of different features that went into it. So I didn't need a special opponent or a special team or a special reason. It was always there for me and all the other guys as well, I think.
During what was Walt Frazier like?
Well, just a damn good basketball player. I didn't appreciate him so much when we played because he was only a sophomore and he didn't have the notoriety back then. He was just kind of coming into his own. I think the next year they went to the NIT, and he established himself as kind of all-American material. But it was more like he was just another player on the team, but extraordinarily good. You could just tell that he was a little bit better than everybody else on their team. By the way he jumped and handled himself, and looked for the ball when the chips were down. But as a personality, I don't remember anything about him in terms of he had this unique way about him or anything like that. Just a damn good basketball player.
You know, you guys, you run the perfect season. You win the championship. Do you remember when that last buzzer went off and you're a champion, a perfect champion? Do you remember your thoughts or what you were thinking about at that particular time? And do you reflect back that? And how much do you reflect back on that?
I don't know if I remember anything special. When the buzzer went off, it was like just like closure, I guess. You know, we did it. I think probably more than anything else, we did it. We did it, doggone it. Everything we wanted to do, we did it. And that was kind of it. And I do reflect back on, I don't reflect on that moment so much, but I do reflect back on the whole season a lot. And, my wife said to me a few months ago, she said, you really lived the season twice. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, you were there when it was happening, but for the last couple of years while you've been writing this book, you've lived it a second time. And I said, that's I didn't realize that, but I've had the fortune of living it on a very intimate level, and so it's almost now at this stage in my life, it's not this moment or that moment, it's the whole thing. It's like, I don't know I can't think of a good analogy, but it's like the whole thing is a gift. And I'm just glad I had the experience from the first day of preseason practice all the way up till the time I went to bed, after the last game.
How competitive are you and your brother Gary?
Well, I'm not competitive with Gary, but he's terribly competitive with me. I'm just kidding.
So what are the conversations like when the Griegers get together for a Thanksgiving or a Christmas?
Well, Gary likes to talk about himself. No, in all seriousness, Gary and I have always been really close. And, Gary's always been 2 years behind me sports-wise, 2 years behind me in the Little League baseball and 2 years behind me at Bosse, and then 1 year behind me in college. 1 year behind me in college since I redshirted. But, I've always been very happy for Gary and all his successes. When people have asked me, did you have any jealousy when Bosse, led by my brother, won the the Indiana High School basketball championship in 1962? And the answer is, honest to goodness, no. I was just very, very happy for him. In fact, one of the people who read the book before it got published, he says, you must have had some jealousy. You have to tell that story. And I said, honest to goodness, I didn't. I can't lie and put that in there for drama's sake. So, and Gary's always been extraordinarily supportive of me, and as well. So we've been we're very close to each other, and he actually nominated me for the Basketball Hall of Fame, the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame, and he was kind of the spearhead of, whatever lobbying he did. And so, but of course, I was better than he was. I don't think there's any question about that. You would agree with that, wouldn't you, Billy?
Yes, sir. Speaking of the Indiana...
I'm not going to tell...
Go ahead.
I'm not going to tell Gary this is going to be on the air. I'm going to just say, Billy stood me up, and I never got to talk to him.
Speaking of the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame, what emotions did you have, or how did you feel when you got that phone call? Well, I
was kind of stunned, I was down in the Caribbean actually on vacation, and I got a call on my wife's cell phone, of all things, at a restaurant from Phil Eskew, who said, "Hey, Russ, this is Phil Eskew." So right then I knew that he was probably calling me with good news, but it kind of took my breath away. It's like I was sitting there, and we chatted for about 5 minutes, and he congratulated me, and I thanked him, and I hung up the phone and just kind of sat there, like dazed and stunned. And my wife said, "Are you okay?" And she was thinking maybe I just got the news that somebody had died, like like a good buddy or something like that. And I said, no, I was Phil Eskew calling me and letting me know that I was in the Hall of Fame. And then she whooped and hollered, and I was with my son and his fiance at the time, and we had a celebration. But it was quite a thrill, and I feel extremely honored. When I had my acceptance speech, one of the things I said was, I'm so honored to be part of such illustrious company, and I kind of went down some of the big names, Don Schlent, who played for Indiana back when, and Oscar Robertson, and Larry Bird, and Steve Alford. And I said, imagine me being in the same, the same setting as these guys. I mean, good God, how can somebody not be awed by that?
You know, when I went a couple of years ago, it I couldn't play ball worth a lick, but I just really have a passion for it, and there was a lot of people around me that, introduced the game and everything that you can learn from the game. And when I went into the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame, it just goosebump. It's just a fabulous place, and it's very well deserved for you.
Well, I appreciate that, Billy, and I'll tell you, what's his name, Chris May, who runs it. I mean, it's got a small staff, but it is a fabulous place. I mean, the history's all there, and I'm just thrilled to be just a little bitty piece of it. Just totally thrilled. Yeah,
the only state to really have their own basketball Hall of Fame is just an amazing place. Did you ever, once your college career is ending, did you want to get into coaching? Did you want to maintain an association with basketball? And what way did you go?
Well, no, I'm one of these lucky guys that I take no credit for it. It just happened. I knew what I wanted to do with my life back in high school. I picked up a book on psychology. I have no idea why I did this, because I wasn't particularly intellectually minded at the time. The world of ideas didn't really excite me. And I picked up a book called A Primer of Freudian Psychology. Why? I have no idea. That didn't sound like me back then. But I read the book, and I remember being kind of just like, oh my goodness. And I remember my thought, which was, you can understand what goes on in a human mind, just like you can understand what goes on under the hood of the car. And this is what I want to do with my life. So I always knew that I wanted to be a psychologist, and the idea of coaching never came, to me. I think coaching would be very, very fascinating. Boy, but what a high pressure job, particularly this day and age with the cutthroat nature of it all. But so I left Evansville immediately the next fall, enrolled in Ohio State, and spent 5 years at Ohio State getting my doctorate. I've been practicing psychology ever since. I had an interesting thing the other day, realization. Somebody was asking me a question, when did you come to Charlottesville? And I told them, and I said, well, when did you start? And anyhow, I looked back on and I was in college literally from 1960 through 1970. I spent 10 years in college, and I didn't realize this. I spent the whole decade of the 60s in college. I never looked at it like that before. 5 years in undergrad and then 5 years in graduate school. So coaching wasn't in the picture at all.
But if you look at it in a way, you do coach.
Well, that's actually a very good point. I do, and I watch Mike Krzyzewski, for example, on television. I read his books, and Urban Meyer, the coach of Ohio State, just has a wonderful book out called Above the Line. And if you like sports, Billy, you should get the book. It's actually a wonderful book about how he has created the Ohio State football culture. It's a book for anybody who has a leadership role. But the man probably spends 70% of his time on the psychological part of it and only 30% on the X's and O part of it. So you actually, you make a good point. I guess I do coaching, and I guess coaches do psychology. So there is a natural fit there.
The book is called The Perfect Season, a memoir of the 1964 to 1965 Evansville College Purple Aces. We've been chatting with Russ Grieger, Dr. Russ Grieger. So is there, like, when you write a book like this and it's out and about, and of course people can go to iupress.indiana.edu and pick it up, and I'm sure probably Barnes & Noble or Amazon. But is there like a book tour, or do you promote the book in any way by being any places to autograph or anything like that?
Well, I mean, Indiana University doesn't do quite the promotions that you would do if you were, Jimmy Carter or somebody like that writing a book. But I am going to be in Evansville on November the 19th for a home game. I'm going to be signing books there and at Barnes & Noble in Evansville the night before that on Friday night, the 18th, I believe it is. And I'm working on arranging a few other sorts of things like that. But, if anybody wants to buy it, I think you gave the reference, IU Press, and Amazon will have it and all that kind of stuff. If I can push the book a little bit, just explain a little bit, I really put my heart and soul in this because The Perfect Season, a couple of my colleagues, when they asked me what the title was, they said, well, you can't call it The Perfect Season because that'd give it away. And I said, well, it's not a mystery book. It's really more than simply we won the championship. When I wrote the book, Billy, I considered it to be the perfect season on three levels. One level is winning the championship undefeated, so that's the obvious perfect season. But also, I really believe we came together and were a perfect team who then won all of their games. And I've actually used my team doing organizational consulting and leadership consulting and team building with companies throughout my career, talking about using, the characteristics of the ACEs to illustrate what it takes to build a perfect team in your organization. And then the third level is the very personal level. I think you'll probably recognize that there's a lot of very, very personal stuff in there, and how I made these personal growths myself. I think people that know me might say that's not true. I'm the same immature person I was back then. But I really made the transition from, only thinking of myself as a basketball player, and my self-esteem would ride and fall on whether I was competent or incompetent on any given day playing basketball, to realizing that I was not only a basketball player, I played basketball, but I wasn't just a basketball player, so that, not being the superstar on the team, for example, just being a cog in the wheel, that was not a reflection on whether I deserved to be on this planet or not. And, for me, and I think for a lot of people, that was quite a powerful kind of a thing that I learned. And so it's The Perfect Season reflects to not perfection, because I certainly know that I'm not perfect, but a perfect realization on a very personal level. So it's a very layered book, and I'll leave it up to the reader to determine how much they like it or not, but I put everything I had into the sucker.
I have 27 books that I have here on my bookshelf with stuff that is associated with basketball in Indiana. And my two favorite books are the One Small Town, One Crazy Coach by Mike Rose, and of course The Perfect Season, and The Perfect Season by you. I enjoyed it thoroughly. 2 thumbs up, 10 fingers up. So I just think anybody who gets this book is going to enjoy it. And just the way you feel like you're in the book, and you can just the description and how in depth you are of describing the situations, the atmosphere, your emotions is just fantastic, and I love it. And I hope it does really well for you.
Well, thanks, Billy, and I think that is really a high compliment, because that's exactly what I was trying to do. So if that had that impact on you, then I at least succeeded in my efforts with you. So that's a good start. And by the way, Mike's book is a wonderful book too. He's become a friend of mine, and he actually gave me some really nice input in putting together the final draft. So Mike's book is a fabulous book. I've read that too.
So you can head on over to iupress.indiana.edu, and you can get The Perfect Season, a memoir of the 1964-65 Evansville College Purple Aces by Russ Grieger. Dr. Grieger, I know you told me I couldn't have to call you doctor. Thank you so much.
I told you I'd have to kick your butt if you kept calling me Dr. Grieger.
Hey, at least I got your last name right, man. I was struggling on that for a while. Thank you so much, Russ, for spending some time with us and talking about your book, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure that the people who'll pick it up will enjoy it also.
Thank you so much, Billy. And Looky, I just want to compliment you. This thing you're doing, keeping all these memories alive, is a wonderful, wonderful thing. I've listened to many of them, and hearing, I remember Bobby Plump and Jimmy Rail, great interviews, and it's so wonderful to what you're doing. You're just doing a fabulous thing here for the state of Indiana and other people, for that matter.
Well, thank you so much.